So before we begin, this is for informational purposes only. This is not the end all be all for information available on hiring respite providers. And of course, if you have any complex legal questions, you should consult a qualified attorney. I do have a skill set, but law is not one of them. So I can answer general questions, but I cannot answer specific questions about your specific scenario. Okay. So what are we going to do today? We're going to talk about relationship roles, having a job description, keeping records, and having a contract with your respite provider, telephone screening of applicants, how to interview one, background checks, how to find respite providers, creating a good work environment for that respite provider, how to train them, and if necessary, how to terminate the employee or the respite provider. Okay. And some of you may be thinking, well, I just have my cousin come by, or I just have my neighbor come by. Do I really need all these things? I mean, no one's going to come and arrest you for not doing these things, obviously. But this is just a great way to prevent misunderstandings in the future. And we'll get into the do's and don'ts and the whys as this progresses. So even if you don't think it's applicable to your situation, there may be some information in here that is worth listening in on and maybe applying to your current setup. That will just make things easier for you and everyone involved. So relationship roles. Okay, so when we hire a respite care provider, it's very important that we define the roles, okay? Because defining the relationship means knowing the responsibilities of the provider and the respite care recipient, which would be you as the caregiver, okay? So you're the one purchasing the services or using volunteers to provide respite care. And so you are the manager, essentially, okay? And so the relationship may be one of friendship or family member, but first, the relationship must be viewed as that of a manager, assistant, or employee. If the provider is to give quality respite care services the way that you want them done, okay? Why? Because if the responsibilities are not clearly defined, problems will arise, okay? And it's not a matter of if, but when problems will surface. Okay. And that might sound a little harsh because you're like, well, I don't want to treat my niece as an employee. And I'm not saying you have to be rigid in this space or anything like that, but defining the relationship is important going forward. Because when they're a respite provider, when they're there kind of on the clock, so to speak, they aren't just your niece, right? They are essentially your employee. Okay. And so setting boundaries, part of defining the relationship between the provider and the caregiver, it is important to set boundaries of the relationship. So think of boundaries as limits, and they determine, and that determines what you, and determine what your limits will be. Sorry, I'm a little tongue-tied this morning. So do you want a strictly business type relationship, friendship? It may be impossible for the relationship to not have the characteristics of both, obviously, because caregiving is very intimate. But it is important to know that the business relationship needs to be primary, okay? So most problems occur when the role of each person is unclear or when the roles change. So a part of setting the boundaries is dealing with the issue of control, okay? So control is an issue in almost all relationships, and it is generally defined as managing, overseeing, or being in charge. And so you, as the caregiver, you are the manager and must have primary control over the services provided by the respite provider. Okay, so control is not domination. Okay, I'm not saying go in there and be a bully and micromanage everything, but control does involve managing and overseeing in order to get the goals accomplished, right? So it's important to note that the person in control of a situation, they must first be able to control their own thoughts, feelings, and emotions, okay? So this is very important for you as a respite provider because it can be a very high stakes role, right? Very emotionally volatile sometimes. And so being able to control your own thoughts, feelings, and emotions can be very important when you start defining and interacting in these caregiving roles and with your respite provider. And it's also important for the person in charge to respond appropriately to situations. Okay, so everyone has the right to be treated with courtesy in a humane, dignified manner and be treated with kindness. Okay, so you are responsible for sharing with the provider your specific expectations when it comes to respite care. Okay, so if they don't know what your expectations are, if they don't know their defined role, there could be a lot of muddy waters there. Okay, and a lot of mistakes can be made unintentionally because there's not a clarification in the very beginning. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about burnout. So keep in mind, the job of a respite care provider is not easy and it can be quite stressful, even if you're hiring somebody who is a professional, okay? Even if they've had specialized training. You know, as well as anybody else in this space, that caregiving is not easy, okay? And so somebody who's doing it full time as a job, you know, it is a high potential risk for burnout, right? And so burnout prevention is crucial. And I'm going to give you a few tips that can help prevent burnout and keep you from having to recruit, hire, and train new respite providers too often, right? Because if you burn your respite provider out, they may decide to go somewhere else, right? Where they have better treatment or better hours, right? So most providers are naturally going to be more nurturing and take on the concerns of others more readily. And so it's important to encourage your provider to take plenty of time for themselves. Very similarly, how I encourage you all every week to take time for yourselves and to replenish and refill your cup, right? So you want to try to include some variety in their work and be as flexible as possible within limits, right? We don't want to say, well, I want you to come, you know, from 10 to 2 on Fridays, and then every other Friday they're saying, giving you some excuse why they can't come, right? We want to be understanding, but we don't want to allow recklessness either. Okay, so within limits. So this may include asking the provider to take your loved one out of the house for a walk or some activities that they both enjoy, right? So it doesn't have to just be, you know, tasks and checklists. Okay, they can do things that are fun and you know, stress relieving for both of them. And it's important, if you can, to have backup providers so that you can use them if it's necessary, right? People get sick. People, you know, have things come up out of the blue. They have doctor's appointments, right? Life happens whether you're a provider or not. And so if you can get a backup provider for those types of scenarios, it's always good to do so. But I do know that that's not always the reality for everyone. But it is also important to communicate often with your provider, right? Good communication between you and the provider cannot be overemphasized, all right? Doing this will help both of you to maintain good working relationships, okay? Next, we're going to talk about a job description. Yes, you do need a job description, okay? Even if it's informal, even if it's not very detailed, okay? Of course, I will advocate that the more detailed, the better. So that way, both of you know what to expect from one another. The boundaries and the expectations are clearly defined. So there's not a lot of gray area left for people to guess or assume, okay? So the best way to manage a provider is to look closely at the ways that you do your job, right? Daily living activities, feeding schedules, medication, right? So if you do that, you'll be able to start building a realistic picture of what you need them to do, what kind of help you actually need, so that you can take a break without worrying that they're going to drop the ball, right? So assessing your needs will help you locate the right person for the job, right? So if your likes and dislikes and requirements for a provider are something that you're aware of, then it'll help you to put together a job description that meets your needs, right? It can't just be any random person, right? It has to be somebody who's capable of providing the care that you are requesting of them. So what are some of the good reasons why you need to create a job description? The process of creating a job description will help you develop that realistic view of your needs and give you a basis for interviewing applicants. If your loved one needs, medications administered, are they able to do that? If they need help with mobility, are they able to lift a certain amount of weight, right? Are they squeamish? So are they going to be able to do things like incontinence care or drawing blood or what have you, okay? Do they have a calm and friendly demeanor if they're caring for maybe children who have sensory needs, right? So you want to make the right fit. A job description will keep the interview focused on job duties. Okay, sometimes you might want to interview somebody and personality-wise, you click and you don't even get to what the duties are. And then the first day on their job, they have no idea what they're doing. But they were friendly and they were nice and you guys got along, which is important. But, of course, you can be friendly and incompetent at the same time. So you want to make sure you're having the right person come in, right? You want a job description that provides the potential provider with clear ideas about what you're requiring for the job, right? What are the details? What is the job? And then after that provider is employed, the job description can be used as a checklist of duties and responsibilities, right? And of course, when you have that job description, that helps you to clarify your expectations and remain in focus, especially if you need to critique their work or if they are clear on what's happening when they're first hired, then they can't act surprised when that particular task comes up, right? And so the job description can help you settle disagreements regarding job duties and responsibilities. Okay, so it's really just kind of like a cover your butt scenario, right? Nobody wants to be surprised at what the job is the first day. And you don't want them to be blindsided by the intensity of the tasks either, right? So record keeping and an agreement contract. Okay, this may seem a little bit what's the word, like overkill, especially if you're just like, well, I'm just having a friend come over. I'm just having a family member come over, right? But accurate record keeping is critical when keeping up with the time a respite worker provides a service for you, right? So keep in mind that you can set the time you wish to use the respite services, okay? Especially through our program, it's whatever you and the respite provider agree on, right? But the Department of Labor does require that a person working a scheduled amount of time be considered an employee and not a respite care provider. So be aware of the rules for paying a provider, okay? And that is, if, before I mentioned, if there's any specific legal requirements or questions you have, I can give you general information. But, if you're having a respite provider come in and they're working full-time hours, there's probably a little bit more in-depth work that you have to do. But for the most part, you're talking about maybe a few hours a week here and there. You probably don't have to be super intense about it. But again, you assess your needs and determine what works best for you, okay? You may need to check with the IRS to determine the amount of income paid to ensure you as the employer know your responsibility for paying certain payroll benefits if appropriate, okay? And again, that would probably be for full-time, 40 hours a week kind of a care, okay? Providing respite care is not the same as a personal care attendant because it's only temporary care, okay? So you should not have to have a consistent time schedule, but if you are looking for that specifically, just do your due diligence and research what the IRS would rather you do so that you can file your taxes appropriately, okay? Because most caregivers do not use a provider on a regular basis, you're not going to have to pay the amount that would require them to file payroll benefits, right? If you're only giving somebody $50 every 3 weeks, the IRS isn't really going to require a whole lot from you, if anything, okay? And an agreement contract. So an agreement between you and the provider is important because this formalizes the relationship and clearly indicates responsibilities of you and your provider. So the agreement should be flexible, but it should also contain the main responsibilities of the respite care provider as well as the caregiver. So the duties of the provider can change, obviously, needs change. And so the agreement should be updated as appropriate. And reviewing that agreement every 6 months or at least annually is good practice. Okay. If you have a loved one who has increasing needs over time, if they have a condition that you can anticipate decline, the agreement you made in the beginning may not be suitable for the agreement a year later. Okay, so it's always good to keep that in mind and be flexible. So here's just a sample agreement. Of course, you could probably just create one in a Word document or Canva, or just write it down on a sheet of paper. And it's just a very generic example here where you just kind of say, these are the duties that are they're responsible for. We're going to treat each other with mutual respect. An agreement on how much the provider is going to work and how much. And then you guys can both sign that, okay? All right, so screening potential providers is very helpful, okay? If you have multiple people that you know and trust already, I would still recommend doing some kind of screening with them. But if you're hiring strangers, I would highly advise you to screen them, of course. And telephone screening can save time for both you and the applicant, okay? So in a telephone screening, you should discuss important points about the job, right? Let them know what they're getting themselves into, what your expectations are. Of course, you don't have to go through the whole laundry list of things, but if you're screening someone through the telephone and they say, well, hey, this isn't really what I could do, or this isn't really what I want to, agree to, then, that's just a very quick phone call. You don't have to waste anybody's time by meeting up in person or introducing them to your loved one or anything like that, right? You want to find out information about the applicant and get a first impression of the person, right? So some tips for screening: always trust your instincts and your gut reaction, okay? If something feels off to you, trust that, okay? I'm not saying that every person that gives you, a suspicious feeling is suspicious, but if you already have kind of, feeling some kind of way or having some kind of gut reaction about a person, and you ignore that, I feel like that could probably potentially just creep up unexpectedly if you do end up hiring that person, right? Like, well, I don't know, she was kind of made me feel a little off in the beginning, so now I don't trust her around, my personal belongings, right? That kind of thing. Be friendly and pleasant, okay? Obviously, just be courteous. Check to see if this person has reliable transportation and if getting to work on time will be a problem. Sometimes people are very willing to do the job, but they don't have the means to get there or get you, or, even if you need them to be there at a certain time, but they're waiting on rides, okay? So that could always potentially be a conflict. Make sure you let them know that you'll need to do a criminal background check, okay? And we'll talk about that in a little bit. Discuss money and hours, okay? Even in a screening phone call, okay? A lot of times people don't want to talk money right away because they feel like it's rude. It's absolutely not rude. If I were interviewing for a job and they didn't tell me how much they were going to pay me and how long they wanted me to work there, I would not take that job, okay? So we want to make sure we're very straightforward in the very beginning so we don't waste anyone's time. You can give a brief description of the job duties and if the pay and hours are already determined to be acceptable, okay? And then if all that clears and you like what you hear, set up a time to conduct a formal interview in person if possible, okay? And I would also advise to give directions and your address only to those who you choose to interview, or consider using a location other than your home for an initial interview just for safety's sake, okay? So how do you interview somebody? It can seem kind of intimidating, I'm sure, especially if you are interviewing a stranger, right? We want to use common sense in setting up face-to-face interviews, right? Again, maybe use another place other than your home for the interview, like a library or something like that. And then prior to the interview, consider the personal qualities you feel are important for a respite provider, right? Do you want them to be trustworthy, honest? Do they need a sense of humor? Do they need a positive attitude? Is it important that your respite provider has common interests with the care recipient? Dependability, I'm sure, is a main one. Do they have the ability to follow directions and communicate well? Okay, especially if you have somebody who has maybe more intense medical needs, or they're, medically fragile. You want to make sure that you can communicate well with the provider so that there's no question of what the expectations of the process is of caring for your loved one. So some tips for interviewing. We want to try to make the situation as comfortable as possible, okay? I would assume many, if not all of us, have had job interviews before, and they can be a little nerve-wracking, even if it's something that you're excited to do. So we want to try to make things comfortable for both of you. Explain the disability or the illness of your loved one to the extent that makes you comfortable, okay? Provide a job description. Ask about jobs that they currently have or have had in the past, including tasks performed, how they felt about those tasks, like did they like them, did they dislike them, and also if the person's currently working, okay? Because if they're currently working, then you're going to have to work your respite schedule around their working schedule, and so that's important to know as well, okay? It's important to ask for at least 2 work references. Of course, if you're hiring friends and family, you can use your discretion in that regard. And then explain how you're going to evaluate job performance. Sometimes people don't think about this, and they think, well, I'm just going to run to the grocery store for a couple hours. I don't need to get that in depth. And that may be true. But if they're going to be long-term care providers in your home taking care of your loved one, it is important to evaluate their performance, right? And let them know how that's going to be evaluated so there's no surprises later. Take notes while you interview, especially if you're interviewing multiple candidates. You don't want to forget what somebody said or trust that you're going to remember it because, like we are all susceptible to forgetful things, especially when we're tired and burnt out. And be cautious about hiring somebody on the spot, okay? Be sure to check your references first. Sleep on it, do whatever you have to do, but impulsively hiring somebody could potentially fall apart down the road, okay? So you want to make sure that you're confident in that decision. All right, now we're going to talk about background checks, okay? So make sure that the person you're interviewing understands that you need to conduct a criminal background check, okay? You have to have permission of the person who is a possible candidate to do the background check, okay? So if you don't let them know and then, you want to do a background check on them, they're going to be kind of blindsided by that, right? They show up the first day and you're like, well, go down to the police department and get your get your fingerprints, right? So you want to let them know very, very quickly within the interview process that that's something that you're going to have them do, okay? Consent forms are designed specifically for this, and they can be obtained through your local Department of Human Resources or police department, okay? There is a cost to doing a background search, and it varies depending on who does the search and how extensive it is. Okay, so for example, some police departments charge about $10 for a search of their database or from the local county in which you live. But remember that the information you get will depend on who does the search. So it may be worth the money to have a private company do the search for you. A private company may charge a little bit more, typically between $20 and $50, but they'll offer you a statewide search, okay, not just a county search, because you could have somebody who is in Morgan County and they have no criminal record there, but then, you look down to Tuscaloosa and all of a sudden, they're all over the place, right? And you can even do a national search and find out what they're up to in other states, if that's important to you, okay? Word to the wise, do not send the applicant to pick up the results, okay? Go get them yourselves. And if you are wanting to do a background check, but you're not in a place where you can do, $50 or what have you, we have a stipend available for caregivers to assist in conducting criminal background checks if you choose to. So if you want to get more information on that, my contact information will be available at the end of this presentation, and you can reach out to me and I'll help you get that stipend application underway, okay? All right, so we got a lot of good information about hiring and interviewing and all that stuff, but where do you find respite providers? Okay. Some counties have more options than others. Okay. I know that. So you might have to get more creative in some areas. But you can find many ways to locate potential respite care providers. And you can even advertise for them too. Um, so faith-based churches, things like that, faith-based organizations and churches. Um, Sometimes they have respite nights. They have volunteers. About a year and a half ago, I did a respite training for a group of volunteers at a church in Birmingham, and they were, offering this free to their community. So that could be a good place to start. Nursing homes or assisted living facilities, sometimes they have people looking to work extra hours to make some extra money. Sometimes they'll advertise on bulletin boards and things like that, like, hey, I'm a care provider. If you need extra help, give me a call. Hospitals and universities also may have some good leads. You may have some nursing students who are looking for extra work or extra experience. Rehab centers, so rehabilitation centers, physical therapy, occupational therapy, speech therapy. Okay. Again, there may be providers there who work full time or part time who are looking to get some extra experience and some extra cash on the side. Social service agencies, they may not have them displayed, but they may have like social workers and case managers on staff who know where these respite providers are kind of hiding, and they can kind of point you in the right direction. And then, of course, word of mouth. Okay. Put something on your social media account, your Facebook. Ask people that you work with, or, people at your church if you attend a church, or, your house of worship. You'd be surprised how many people would be willing to step in and become a respite provider. They just never knew that was a thing they could do, right? But they love to help. So you may just, put out the bat signal, so to speak, and they could come to you. Another option is, if, of course, the state of Alabama, you can visit our website at alabamarespite.org, click on Access Caregiver Resources, and we have a community respite programs database on our website. Okay, it's listed by county. There are no for-profit respite provider agencies on that list. We only put low cost or no cost respite providers on that list. And it is listed by county, and we are always updating it. So if you come across a great resource, please let me know and we'll add it to the database, okay? Of course, you can always just call us or email us too and ask for help. Next, creating a good work environment. Okay, so creating a good work environment is a very important factor in keeping your provider. Okay, respite work generally does not pay super great. Okay, and it doesn't offer a lot of benefits. Okay, and of course, if you're working for a for-profit, that may be a different scenario. But you as a respite or as a caregiver, you're hiring a respite provider, you're probably not offering them, 401ks and vacation time. Okay. So those who choose to work as a provider often take the job for other rewards like personal satisfaction or a chance to work with people with disabilities and chronic health illnesses, and just to help out caregivers, right? There's a lot of compassionate people who don't mind carving out some time in their week to help. And so the work environment is one of the most important factors in keeping that provider, and that you should do what you can to create a work environment that will bring out the best in your provider, okay? Maintaining a positive attitude and being satisfied with their work is essential for the provider to continue helping you with those services, right? You don't want them to begrudge coming to your home, right? You don't want them to feel burnt out or tired and stressed before they even clock in, okay? So good communication between you and the provider will help both of you get along better and be happier with the arrangement, okay? So offer praise for good or correct performances, right? Many people will work just as hard for praise, and it's just as important as what you're able to pay them, right? Everyone wants to feel appreciated, needed, and valued. I don't know about you, but I've had some jobs that didn't pay very well, but the work environment was fabulous. And so it was an okay trade for me at the time. Conversely, I've also had jobs that have paid really well, but the work environment has been absolutely miserable and it was not worth it for me, right? So just keep those realities in mind when you're creating a work environment, okay? When it is necessary to point out that your respite provider didn't meet your needs appropriately, it's important to remember to be open, honest, and criticize the action, not the individual. Okay, we want to course correct through concise communication, not by degrading or belittling somebody. Okay. Don't let small irritations build up until an angry outburst occurs. Okay, and I think this is great advice regardless of if you're talking about a provider caregiver relationship or not, right? Anger that's vented after building up is often expressed in destructive ways, right? So we will always want to make a point to discuss something that irritates you as soon as possible. Okay, confrontation is not pleasant, of course, but it is necessary. Okay, and you can do it in a way that is constructive, right? So you can say something like, I want to make sure that, the walkways are clear so that way when mom's going to the kitchen with her walker, she doesn't trip over shoes or what have you, right? And so if your provider doesn't keep those spaces clear, you can just remind them, address the risks. But you don't have to say things like, are you dumb? Why didn't you think to do this? I already told you, right? We want to be kind and considerate and respectful. Remember that your provider is a human being and they would like to be treated in honest, kind, respectful, and patient manner, the same way that everyone else would like to be treated. Okay. Yes, they are working for you, but they are a human being who's doing this as an option they agreed upon. So we want to make sure that we treat them respectfully. Talk to your provider and be open about making changes if the job description needs that, okay, or compromise to alleviate a problem. All right. If your loved one's needs have changed, you need to talk to your provider about that and let them decide if that's something that they want to continue working towards with you or not. Okay. You can terminate the agreement if the relationship isn't working out, right? And there are good ways and bad ways to accomplish this task as necessary, and we'll get into that later on, okay? But sometimes, you interview well, the first couple times go well, but then, something occurs or, as you get to know the person a little bit better, you realize, maybe this isn't as good of a fit as I thought it was, and that's okay. Just let them know, right? Don't sit there and swallow it down and hold resentment and then blow up on them one day and fire them, right? Keep your working relationship separate from your personal life. This is very important if you're hiring somebody that you already know that's personally in your life outside of their care as a respite provider. We want to keep that as separate as we can, okay? And if you have the opportunity to provide a positive work environment for your provider, as well as yourself and your loved one, take it, okay? Remember that good communication with your provider is key to the good relationship that you all want, right? So when everyone's happy, providers will stay with you longer and do a better job for you. And that's a mutual benefit for both, okay? So how do you give praise and feedback to your respite provider? Always be sincere, okay? Don't say something you don't really mean. And give compliments often for good work performance. Too often, employees only hear when their manager is angry with them or dissatisfied, right? Positive reinforcement can go a really long way. A two-step compliment. So describe the situation or event that you like and tell what you're feeling. Tell what you're feeling when it happened. Say you appreciate it, say thank you, right? I always appreciate that, you're so gentle with mom in the morning. I really like that you are punctual, right? Giving constructive criticism. So we want to use criticism as a tool for sharing information, okay? It is not punishment. It is not an opportunity for you to vent your frustrations, okay? It is a tool for sharing information. And so Keep in mind that the whole idea of a respite provider is to help you take a break from full-time caregiving, right? So you want them to perform to your expectations and continue providing respite for your benefit, okay? Constructive criticism doesn't have to be a negative thing, okay? Three-step correction, okay? So if you want to give your respite provider feedback, here's a great way to go about doing it. So first, describe the situation or event that you disliked, okay? I didn't like that you left your shoes in the hallway. Second, tell what your feeling was when it happened. It made me feel like you were being careless and didn't realize that, that was a safety hazard, right? And then third, state how you'd like it handled next time. In the future, I'd appreciate it if you put your shoes by the door when you came in instead of in the way of, a walking path, okay? So you're very concise. You let them know what happened, how it felt to you when it happened, and what you would like the solution to be going forward, okay? Suggestions for giving correction, okay? So we want to give the feedback as soon as possible after the situation occurs that you didn't like, okay? We don't want to say, well, 3 weeks ago right? Okay, we want it to happen as soon as we notice it and as soon as possible, okay? We only want to discuss one incident at a time, okay? We don't want to come with, a CVS length receipt about all of the ways that they've displeased you over the last 6 months, okay? We want to do one incident at a time. And we don't want to bring up things from the past, especially if they're already resolved. Okay, so if you had made a comment before, you gave some constructive criticism, they shifted and met your standards, we don't need to bring that back up and say, oh, and remember 6 months ago when, okay, because that's already been resolved. And we want to talk about the present, no matter how great the temptation is to do otherwise, okay? Especially if you're kind of heated or you're angry, or like kind of things simmer for a while, it can be easy to kind of be tempted to bring out all the, the grievances at once. We want to try to make sure that we stay in the present moment. And we want to focus again on their actions, not them as a person, okay? Because actions can be shifted and changed and learned from, but if we start attacking the person, that erodes the relationship very, very quickly. We want to be brief when we have these discussions and to the point. We want to use concise language. We don't want to drag it on, hem-hawing, and being, passive aggressive. Okay, we want to be very direct. We don't want to exaggerate or become overly emotional, and we want to be mindful of our tone of voice. Okay, why? Because only 30% of messages that we send are with words. Our body language and the tone of voice and inflection, that does the rest, okay? So the way you speak will affect the way your provider reacts, okay? Well, she didn't say anything mean, but she said it really rudely, right? He had an attitude when he said it. So it's like then they didn't even hear a word that you said because of how you said it, right? We've all been there. Just a few more slides, guys. So training your respite provider, okay? Most of you know that when your loved one got their diagnosis and you got a care plan or what have you from the doctor, it did not include a lot of the things that you learn in the trenches, right? Nobody sends you home with a diagram on how to care for somebody who just had a stroke. I mean, you might get some information, but you're not going to get all the details of what it looks like to care for your person who had a stroke, right? So the amount and type of training you need to give your provider is going to depend on the specific needs of your loved one, okay? So training a provider is based on your needs, and this will just reduce confusion later, okay? So it's good to just kind of get it out on the open. So begin by explaining in as much detail as you feel is necessary your loved one's illness or their disability, okay? Explain any technical words you might use and be as specific as possible. If you're giving your loved one injections, you might say, sharps go in here. They don't know what that means, so you have to explain to them that that means an injection needle, right? Emphasize anything related to safety or emergencies, okay? This can go a long way in settling your heart if you're out and about and you're worried about your loved one. What if they have a seizure while I'm gone? What if they choke? What if, they fall, right? Letting your provider know what to do in an emergency can go a long way to allow you to actually rest and relax during your break, right? Give step-by-step instructions for any procedures that they'll be asked to help with, help your loved one do, right? Toileting, bathing, eating, even just entertainment sometimes, right? They might need step-by-step instructions on that. Never assume that they know exactly what you mean, okay? Especially if you're not working with a skilled respite provider who's not in an industry for caregiving, okay? If they're just, Betty from Bible Club or Bible study, she might not understand all the jargon and the language that you use, okay? We want to be patient. Give them time to learn the routine, right? Remember, you have had the privilege of honing your craft for X amount of days, weeks, months, years, right? So if they're brand new, they're going to need some time to learn that routine, okay? And this is where that constructive criticism comes into play, because we can't just assume they're going to hit the ground running and do everything perfectly. There's going to have to be some moments where you correct, course correct, and critique, right? And this is that time that they learn. Try to put yourself in their place and be aware of their feelings as you train them. You don't want to get an attitude within the first couple weeks and then they decide, this isn't worth it. I'm not going to learn this anymore. I don't want to work for you, right? We want to utilize any services of others to help with the training process, right? If you have people in your space that do certain things and they do it well, use them to train your respite provider if that's possible. Don't correct or confront your provider in front of other people. Okay, we want to be respectful, professional. We don't want to jump anybody's case in a way that makes them feel shamed or bad in front of other people. And when it is necessary to dismiss a provider, make sure you let them know clearly without verbally attacking the provider why you are dismissing them. Okay. Also, it's important to know it is illegal to hold payment for services for any reason. Okay. If that service has been provided, no matter how unhappy you are with the way that they provided it, just dismiss them and pay the provider. Okay. We can't just say, well, you spent 16 hours with mom this week. I didn't like the way you did that. And so I'm not going to pay you. Okay. That may be true, but they still spent 16 hours caring for your mother. So they should be compensated for that time. Okay. All right. And finally, terminating an employee. So if you do have to let someone go, make sure you do it in person. Don't do it by text, email, or over the phone. One caveat, though, that I will invite you to consider is if that person is exhibiting signs where they're not safe to do it in person. Okay. I will never advocate for you to put yourself in danger just to follow cultural politeness, right? Cultural niceties. If the person is dangerous, do what you must. But if you can do it in person, that's always the best route. Okay. Set up a time to discuss the matter and find out the true reason why a respite worker does not want to provide services any longer if possible. Okay. If they say that they don't want to do this anymore, sit down and ask them why. What happened? You may not be able to get them to come back and work for you, but you'll know next time if you had something that you did on your end that left them dissatisfied, you can adjust for the next one. Okay, you can learn from that as well. If there's any legal challenge by you or the respite provider, you might need to consult legal services prior to the meeting. And then finally, remember to document the conversation in writing for your records. Put the date, the time, location, and any details that are important for that event. So that way they can't come back and say, well, you said this, you said that, you promised me this, you promised me that, because you have it in writing that that's not what happened. Okay. So here's my contact information. If you want to reach out for the background check stipend, you can email me or call, and anybody who answers can give you the information that you need. If you want to get all of this information in a downloadable PDF, I can send that to you as well. And if you just have any general questions about the information I presented today, feel free to send me an email and we can chat. Okay.